Very good. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this OD talk. I think it's the 14th one that we are, since we started recording the OD talks. And finally, we have Jendor here. Welcome, Jendor.
Thank you very much, Christo. Happy to be here.
Yes, Jendor and Margaret. Margaret is also here from Being Human Group. And for those of you who don't know, Being Human Group acquired 30% of Worldsphere Academy in May, which was a very exciting and interesting move for us. Jendor and Margaret, they are the Strengths Finder people in South Africa. So anything Strengths Finder, these are the people to connect with. So Jendor, we really look forward to the conversation with you this morning, to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure it's going to be very practical, very pragmatic. It's going to give us lots to work with. I quickly want to say about Worldsphere Academy, for those who are joining us for the first time, I don't know if there's anybody such, is that we are an organization development firm. We are specifically an organization development academy. So a huge part of the purpose of Worldsphere Academy is to enable organization development practice. When we started the academy, it was really about building a school of thought around organization development in South Africa, a coherent approach to organization development. You know, when we go out to organizations, we ask, what's organization development? Where does it sit? And what does it do? And similarly, if we go to the universities and we find out what is organization development, what do you teach, and what are the outcomes, we get about as many answers as we ask people. And we went back as an academy into the roots of organization development and the coherent field of organization development as it developed over the past 50, 60 years, based our offering and our approach on that, of course, with our own local innovations. So in that regard, what we offer as an academy is leadership interventions, interventions, culture change interventions, and then very importantly, we offer training and education. I prefer education to training. Training is so instrumental. Education in organization development practice in order to build the organization development capacity of organizations in South Africa and beyond South Africa, so that we can do this incredibly important work of organization development, transformation, creating organizations that are more effective, but are also effective in sustainable and healthy ways. And in that respect, I think our joining with Being Human Group has been a very fortunate and a very promising thing because of the specific skills and practices and tools and instruments that Jendor and Margaret bring to the table. So I am not going to waffle any longer. If you want to know about any of these, like any of the ways in which we could help you, please chat to Liesel, to Roy, to Richard, or even to me. But today we are delving into the practice itself. So I'm going to hand over to Liesel and to Jendor.
Thank you, Christo, and welcome everybody. Yeah, so
As you all know, us world viewers love having conversations. We base everything we do on conversations, and we just love having them. We love learning about OD. And in this trying time, we've been keeping the doors open to have these conversations. We've had morning check-ins every single day for the first 3.5 months. Now they only 3 times a week. And we keep reaching out to clients to just talk to them and see what's going on. And one of the really, really big things has been teams.
Mhm.
It's been about how teams work together, how things have changed, and even through the 5 months, how that has changed. In the beginning, there were so many people saying they're feeling disconnected. They don't know how to reach out. The work they're doing is so transactional. It's panic work. There's no time for the human side of it. And there then came a period where I found in the conversations I was having that suddenly people realized, but we have to connect on a human level. And all these conversations were starting to be had between team members and especially managers. And everything you read from Harvard Business Review and McKinsey's daily Corona updates was saying, make that connection, check in with your people, have personal one-on-one conversations, ask them how they're doing at home, the kids, their family life, etc., etc. And then the narrative became more towards now it's overconnected. Now it's 1 trillion hours of Zoomathons a day, and we're so tired. And the other theme that I found also on the other side of it was that a lot of people were saying the one thing I'm getting sick of is being micromanaged. And that is the side of the team members feeling that, but there's coming from the manager's side, the big, huge transition they had to make from being in the same warehouse or office or at least building, or at least seeing each other regularly, to managing in that way, to now suddenly having to manage virtually. And it seems that some of that have jumped into being micromanaged or being felt that they are being micromanaged. I even had a mail the other day from somebody that was advertising tracking software so that you can see how much work and how many hours your staff is spending on their laptops and what they're actually doing while they're on those laptops. And I actually replied and said, the day I become that kind of manager, please shoot me. But that's that's happening. That's real in the world. Yeah, so we thought that this conversation today is it's not even the same as it was 5 months ago. It keeps changing. So Yendor, that's what I've been seeing. I'm gonna hand over to you and ask you to tell us what you've been seeing and what the wonderful Gallup research is showing us at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liesl and Christopher, for that kind introduction. Yeah, we thought, just to connect with what Christo was saying, as the Godfather would say, we were made an offer we couldn't refuse. So we're very happy to be complementary to the Worldview team. We've really experienced and enjoyed the OD conversations that have emerged over the last several months. I think, Liesl, your point is absolutely valid. I think before the pandemic, if you mentioned teams, everybody would go, what more can we say about teams, teamwork, team building, high performance teams, and so forth. And then I think the pandemic sort of threw a hand grenade into a goldfish bowl. And I think we've learned a lot. I think we've experienced a lot over the last 5 months, and I think we're seeing a lot of what you guys are seeing in the workplace, and suddenly it's become accelerated. So the trends that we saw emerging sort of late last year or early last year has just become exceptionally accelerated, and this Zoom thing has meant that we're really under a microscope now in terms of managers and teams. So what I'm hoping to do is to connect with some of the wisdom around the room, because I think there's a lot of people wondering about stuff in terms of teams. We hope to share some of our learnings and some of our work with our clients. And then I think we have a very interesting case study, which may lead to greater conversations and to insights. So in true spirit of conversation, we really like to see the input from the people around the room, as opposed to me just showing you death by PowerPoint. Because whilst that is interesting, conversing is better. But you spot on. I think one of the biggest things that we've discovered is managers who took in bad relationships into the pandemic have not recovered. So, you can't make up a deficit of relationship and trust in a pandemic situation if that's your departure point. And we've seen managers and leaders really struggle in some aspects. Some have been unexpected heroes, and there's been a whole lot of sort of mix and match in the middle. But I think before we jump off and sort of guide the conversation a bit, Liesl, it might be useful just to ask people to give their input, perhaps either in terms of participation or using the chat button, as to why they're here. What is it about teams that are really interesting for them? What are they perhaps wondering about? And, if we could answer one or two questions for them coming out of the session, what would be valuable for them? Perhaps we can get some input from the guys on the line.
Yeah, I think maybe raise your hand, or at the moment anybody can start chatting or type something for us in the chat function. I'll keep an eye there.
It's always useful to see if people are on the line as opposed to just seeing their names and not their videos, but let's see. So what are you wondering about? Why are you here today? What is it about teams that really excite you or challenge you? If we could answer one or two things that would be valuable for you today, what would that be? Okay. We have nobody yet being brave enough to volunteer. Right, so Carol says, how do we practically keep the balance between micro and distance management? We're feeling like we've entered death by meeting zones. Yeah, Carol, that's spot on. I think that's the nub of the question. We'll give you some clues on how to think a little bit about balance. Obviously, we're a Gallup licensed training partner, so we'll be trying to answer some of those questions that you have using a strength-based point of view. But just to give you a little bit of an upside as to how we think about it, it's about thinking about your team's needs. So if you have a team of 10, each of them are unique individuals in their own right. Depending on who they are, what they bring to the party, their talent, then their potential and their skills, they will either be switched on by the pandemic or really start to struggle. And really a team leader or a manager needs to have quite a nuanced and in-depth view in our minds around what each one of them needs, and also importantly what a team leader in their own right also needs. So it's about understanding your people in a deep sense, and that's why we think strengths are so valuable. So I'll give you a good example of myself. My number one strength is achiever. That doesn't mean success. What it does mean is that I'm very execution based, what Krista would call practical. And I really had to sort of turn down the volume of my achiever during the pandemic because I was just I could not execute at the same rate and pace that I had before the pandemic. And so I had to use other strengths to mitigate that. But I was getting really frustrated with it because you just cannot be as effective during the pandemic as you are during normal times. So depending on whether you're relationship-based, influence-based, strategic thinking based, or perhaps execution based, or combinations of that, a team leader really needs to be switched on in terms of those needs that the individuals have. And so one size does not fit all. So unfortunately, check-ins are fantastic, but what will work for some will not work for others. Carl says, how are leaders optimizing performance when having to lead both virtual and frontline teams? Yeah, Carl, I think that's a great question. I'm not sure. I'm presuming when you're saying virtual teams, some people are at home, and frontline teams, some people are at work. The issue around accountability, I think, has become a huge question mark. And that's really because we see no end to the new normal. So just think about the psychology of it. When we entered the pandemic in our minds, we had this view that there's a start and an end. And like all good South Africans, we were going to tough it out, beat this thing into submission, and we'll go back to the new normal. I think the psychology now is the fact that this pandemic thing has triggered a new way of thinking and a new way of working, and that ain't going to change anytime soon. And so people are going, well, what happens if we don't go back to the office? And that we can't reignite old relationships in the old way. You know, the horse is bolted, the stable door is open, we're not going to go back. And I think the issue around now moving from surviving the pandemic to sustainability in the new normal has changed the question quite dramatically. And people are trying to rediscover, so what does performance management now look like when you have frontline and virtual? when you have your team leader sitting away from your frontline and virtual and so on. So those will be some key questions that will come up. Kyle will try and give you some steer around that, especially during our case study that I'm going to share with you a bit later. There'll be some clues to that, but please feel free to come back to us if we perhaps haven't given you a clear enough steer. Nicholas says, interested in exploring team coherence more deeply and also the context, this with the increased shift to project-orientated work and gig work. Yeah, Nicola, I think that's an interesting one. Team coherence, often what we call a team charter, really is about expectation management around teams, we think. So do teams know really what keeps them together? Do they have expectations, common expectations in mind? Do they know where they're going? Will all be some interesting questions that will come up during this session. So spot on, happy to provide some steer and clues around that. In terms of project orientated and gig work, I think what has really happened is that we've had a dramatically more complex view around matrix. So we all now wear multiple hats. In the past, you would be a team member and perhaps you had a cross-functional matrix team, but now we're all things to all people, and it almost feels like, we are trying to contribute in many different levels and wearing many different hats. And the way to think about that is just think a little bit about working from home. So you may be a parent, you may be a spouse, you may be the head of the household. At the same time, you're trying to run a business, try to contribute, and you may have be a team member of very different teams across different time zones in the world, perhaps. And so how to balance that. We think there's a strength answer to that. So depending on how your strengths work in your world, you'll be able to easily navigate that from a project point of view, or you may need help with a complementary partnership. So we'll give you a couple of clues around that, but I think that's a great question. So Liesel, I think there's some really interesting questions there. I'm pleased that most of those will be on the agenda for this morning conversation, and we'll be able to give clues around that. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to do before we jump straight in.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, guys, I'd like to guide the conversation a little bit, because part of this is a little bit about sharing what we've learned over the last 5 months. We don't pretend to know everything, so we think we know some things, but not everything. So if you want to give some input or ask different questions, you're very welcome to do that. But I just want to share a little bit about what's on our mind. So we're going to try and have a strategic conversation around teams. We're going to try and think a little bit about a tactical one. We're going to talk lots about leadership and managers, because we think that's a very big part of the question, and it's come up significantly this morning already. And then we're going to talk a little bit about individuals, because it is individuals that have to get through the pandemic, especially with the notion of virtual or hybrid teams. We're going to share some Gallup research and collateral around that. We're going to share some of our personal learnings. And then, of course, we're going to bring all that conversation together and perhaps in a practical way and share a little bit of a case study of some of the work that we've done with an executive team. I will ask you guys to put your consulting hats on and pretend to be consultants to this group, and let's see what we would recommend for them. Right, so Lisa, just give me a steer. You guys can see that the slide called BH Group.
I can see it.
Fantastic. It's always good. Right, guys. So we're the Being Human BH Group. We do exactly what we call our name. So Being Human, we work with human beings, and our role really is to think about the science of human potential. So we like to have a lot of research base in terms of what we do. So what we try and do is we try and empower people, positively disrupt workplaces, because we think the traditional old way of working is probably not as effective as it needs to be, and it's pretty boring and wastes a whole lot of talent, and perhaps we spend too much time in traffic historically trying to get to work. And change the way that people lead by using the science of strengths, and that's the emphasis of what we have for today, which is leading using the science of strengths. Just to let you know that what we're going to share with you is not something we made up in our broom cupboard. We're a Gallup licensed training partner, so we'll be sharing some in-depth Gallup research with you. We have tons of experienced coaches that have committed and contribute to this. We have an online delivery option, much as we're doing now, and we really look to measurable results. So when we work with a team, or an organization, we're really looking at the impact around how do we help people develop their potential so we can get improved performance results, and to do it in such a way that we get also a positive return on employee engagement. So it's both the what of performance and the how of engagement that most interests us when we work with teams in particular. And you can keep that as a context because we'll show you some of the results from that. And then we've worked right across Africa, give you a sense of some of our depth. So this is what the hybrid and virtual team looks like now, is that you see a whole lot of your teammates sitting on a Zoom call, much like we're doing now. And we really see three things that we would like you to keep in mind. I love Margaret Mead. If you've ever had, or you've not had an opportunity yet to engage with some of her work, she's really one of the leading thinkers in the cultural anthropology space, particularly around organizations. And she said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, team members in our case, can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So we've seen tons of teams really struggle, but we've also seen teams take the pandemic on, the current situation on, and really thrived. And what we would say is that the potential there is not just to mitigate the pandemic, but to find that sort of ingredients and recipe that's really going to help your team flourish. From our point of view, is we think a strength-based team is a group of imperfect but talented contributors who are valued for their strengths and who need one another to realize individual and team excellence. So when you work from a positive psychology or strength-based approach, we love this definition because it tells us two things. One is we don't have to be perfect, and what a pleasure during the pandemic is we can be more of who we are, and that's good enough. It gives you another clue. We think that people should be valued for their strengths. In other words, what do they bring to the party? And in the time of the pandemic, it probably has nothing really to do with their job title. So we're working with managers, for example, that are discovering that people outside of their job title can contribute significantly to performance and teams that they never thought possible if they were just thinking about their jobs and the box called the job description. And the important thing is that we need one another, obviously, to realize team excellence. So those will be some of the clues that I think of running a great team are important in our mind. We don't have to be perfect, which is great. We know that we can contribute, and this is the key thing around virtual teams, is how to get people to contribute in their own way. We need to value that, and then we need to realize that none of us are perfect, so we need each other, and we need to find those great partners that make sense. So we have this potential of an upside around virtual teams. We know we have some clues around how we can think about hybrid and virtual teams in terms of talented contributors and working together with each other and all that good stuff. And then we have what I call the 70% issue. In terms of Gallup, the Gallup research is pretty unequivocal about this. They say, if you want to get the most out of your team, work with hybrids and strength-based teams in the way that we're thinking, your manager has a huge job to do. In actual fact, a manager impacts the variability in employee engagement scores up to 70% by what they do. So let me just stop there for a minute. So the 70% of the variability in employee engagement scores is made up directly by what managers do. So in terms of the lens that we're going to use, we're going to filter teams and team development from the perspective about what managers need to do, because they're 70% of the variability of your current employee engagement scores in your business. Obviously, if your employee engagement scores are not great, you're going to get a diminishing return on performance and performance objectives. So this is why we think this 70% is an important factor, but it's also a lead indicator of what could happen next. So in this recipe of potential and contribution, your manager is the most important key around things like engagement. We think that in terms of some of the changes or the impact that's happened, there's a new 80-20 rule in play. So if you remember historically, we've always said in leadership development or management development, The idea is that managers should spend 80% of their time on the people agenda and 20% of time on the technical agenda. And we've always tried to get managers to try and balance that more effectively over time. But we've all known that most managers have been promoted because of their technical expertise as opposed to being great managers. And they've hidden behind the fact that they are great specialists or technical people. And they tended to spend more time in their area of speciality or technical capability than actually working on the people agenda. We think the pandemic has really added fire to the 80-20 rule. So the types of things that we're seeing in terms of management is, in the past, managers have almost had the luxury of hiding behind their technical prowess and could muddle through by doing some part of the people stuff or not. We think the pandemic has accelerated what we've always known, that managing effective teams is the job. So we've really now discovered, and I think Liesl put it very nicely when she said, suddenly now it was all about getting to know your team, over communicate, and really, turn up the volume on the being human stuff. And that's always been the job. It's just that historically, when life was easy and traditional, we could muddle through it and not have to worry too much about it. But I think the reality has brutally exposed a couple of things that we've seen in the market. Those managers who took poor relationships or a lack of trust into the lockdown have not recovered. So, a lot of managers are going, well, I didn't have a great relationship with my team. And you can so hear South African managers talk this way. They go, they weren't very good. I had to really make sure and work very hard for us to get through in the traditional manner. Now that we've gone into lockdown, I can't even get them to return a call, or versions of those. Those who could not delegate and did things themselves have struggled to hold their teams accountable. So there's been some really difficult conversations around, well, I've given you data, you're sitting at home, why aren't you answering my calls in the nanoseconds that I expect you to answer? Why have you not proactively told me when you can deliver or not? And there's been some tremendously awkward conversations where managers have phoned employees only to discover that they are at the funeral parlor and they're burying relatives. So there's been some dramatic sort of difficulties around accountability. Managers have also struggled to find the right balance between too little or too much management. And so one person's micromanagement is another person's another person's neglect. So we've had conversations where managers and people we've coached, they say, well, my manager hasn't called me in 3 weeks. They've totally ignored me. They send me an email every now and again, not sure what is going on. And then we have others who go, I just can't get my manager off my back. We are in Zoom meetings 24/7 and it's just talk. Can't get anything done. So this thing about too little and too much, the balance, I think, is mission critical. And those that have not developed their teams in the past are finding that to get people to contribute in the new normal is difficult. So again, if you are a manager that historically is underinvested in your team development, they have not gone into the pandemic fighting fit. And so under the pressure of the pandemic, many of these teams have totally split or broken down or have become so totally individualized. It's like herding cats is often what managers tell us. Yet we also have managers that have, like I said, totally flourished. They've taken in relationships into the pandemic, which they've been able to leverage and build on. They've been able to have those conversations about where the team is going in the time of ambiguity. They've been able to connect and feed the needs of the individuals in their team, and so have driven accountability. And they've continued with the development of their teams. So we've been fascinated between those that are investing in team development right now and those that simply are not. And the difference between those two team experiences is dramatic, especially if you, like ourselves, where we do a lot of individual coaching where people are members of multiple teams. And so this learning curve, if you're not sharing it, you're not investing it and so on, I think is going to make it very difficult. If managers are finding it tricky, can you imagine employees trying to navigate this? And we'll show you some clues about what we think has changed on the individual level as well that managers need to factor in. So I'm just going to pause there for a minute and just see if there is any feedback, any questions, and anything that you may want to share. Does this resonate with people? Does it make sense? Any views? So Roy says, how can teams better look after their manager? It goes both ways. Absolutely. Managing up is as important as managing down. And I think, Roy, it's about really a manager being able to share what they need from the team as a leader, an individual, and as a manager in the question. And so we think strengths is a great way of doing that. So if a manager shares their strengths and their needs and their balconies and basements with their employees, they will know how to contribute far better than just having to guess. And so sometimes, well, a lot of managers have a tremendous amount of blind spots. They say to me, yes, but when I have a conversation with my teams, it's strategic. When you check in with the team, they go, this person micromanages and it's detail and it's operational, and we got to tick boxes and fill out timesheets and all that sort of stuff. So the more that we can all get on the same page, I think the better. Nice question. Okay, everybody seems to be following, so that's good. I'm going to share the screen again. So what does Gallup say? We think that the workplace over the last several years has been changing quite dramatically. The pandemic, we think, has accelerated these changing workplace expectations. And this is really about helping leaders and managers to think a bit about what employees want and need. So what is heightened in the virtual world is the fact that it's no longer a direct line of sight, and that we as managers can force people to do things by our personality and by our authority. Now it's really understanding that we need to fulfill our employees' wants and needs. So the shift, or the lens, I think has been quite dramatic in terms of its change and the acceleration thereafter. As much as we want to value our jobs and want to stay employed, the question now is about helping our employees. So in the past, it used to be quite traditional. It was about my paycheck, my satisfaction, my boss, my annual review, fixing my weaknesses, and my job. We started to see the impact of millennials coming into the workplace, and we started to see a shift happening. This now has totally accelerated to being the following. My purpose. It is very difficult as a virtual team member to stay motivated and get out of bed every morning and put on your game face and your work clothes if you do not know where you're going and what the purpose and the value of what you're doing is. And it's dramatically highlighted. So during the initial phase of the pandemic, we were all around crisis management and proving to everybody that we were online and ticking boxes and so forth. That now shifted to, is what I'm doing valuable? Is it meaningful? Or is my job really about shifting paper from one desk to another? So we've had dramatic changes in the way that we view work, the value of work, and what my real contribution is. And so we've had unexpected positive heroes who have really been able to help people through the change transition and so forth. But I don't think any job has not been impacted by change and rethinking about how they do their work. So that purpose issue has become mission critical. My development. Man, we all went into the pandemic thinking that we had a set of skills that were valuable, and suddenly that changed overnight, and we've learned a whole lot of new things. I was speaking to Margaret this morning, and we're trying to think a little bit about when are we going to go and actually facilitate face-to-face again, and whether we actually want to do that. And so we've learned how to navigate Zoom, how to run virtual programs, connect people across Africa, and have great conversations in ways that we never thought possible 5 months ago. So we've all learned a lot, whether we've liked it or not. We're in a very different space. Even my mother, who's at the grand old age of 75, has discovered WhatsApp. which is fantastic, but unfortunately WhatsApp's free, and so we now can't get rid of my mother on our WhatsApp group. So be careful what you ask for, you may get. So it's been some unexpected pleasures and upsides. So development is mission critical. You'll find people have suddenly discovered a whole lot of online learning programs, and they're all learning frantically new stuff, whether that's out of boredom, desperation, or frankly wanting to take the next career move. Right now, we don't know, but there's a lot of energy in that space. Also be alert that the minute the pandemic starts easing, people are going to shift jobs. And that's not because they're unhappy with you, is that they've just had 5 months to think about whether they want to stay in the job they have or not. And the minute the market starts opening and the jobs become a little bit more freer available, I think you're going to see some dramatic career change impact. So retention is going to be an issue, I think, down the line. What they don't want now is a boss. That person in authority, making sure they come to work, show up and deliver, notwithstanding. What they want is a coach. So there is something about the humanness around engaging with people during the pandemic, but they want somebody who's active in the development space, can have a workplace coaching conversation, can build on and help people during this time in a positive way, and not obsess with what's gone wrong. I want to pause here a little bit because I think it's quite an important point, is that a lot of times managers in a South African context have been brought up on the fact that we're very execution-based. We take hard work for granted. We don't always think smart, but our management style is, yes, Margaret, you've done a good job, but, and that's where we end, that's where we start, but X, Y, and Z, you could do better. That type of approach, I think, is not effective in the space that we're operating. So that ability to be a true workplace coach, where you have a deep interest in others, is now mission critical. And that's the new 80-20. You're going to spend 80% of your time, managers, having human conversations. And that's going to be how you're going to impact performance and engagement. It's not going to be sending out tasks to do. That's just not the way it's going to be done. You are going to execute or get tasks done by coaching people, not telling people to do stuff. So, I think that shift is quite fundamental. It's about having ongoing conversations, not once a quarter, never, seldom. And it's about the depth and the value of those conversations. It's about people's strengths, their contribution, the value they can bring, and it's about their life. And I tell you what, this pandemic has put this my life thing into great perspective. The reality is, the fact is that your work is your home. And we've all had that fantastic experience of having spouses, kids, dogs, cats, and all that sort of stuff walk past and interrupt your Zoom call as you're trying to be very professional and speak to your clients. And we've all had to, I think, be somewhat more human around the fact that we run very complicated lives. In my household, for example, I have a wife who's a teacher, so she's teaching online. I have 3 children that are doing online education at the same time as Margaret and myself are running a business called BHG. So first of all, you've discovered that sharing is caring with Wi-Fi. You're suddenly discovering the fact that elderly parents is an issue to deal with. And you've got to find a place in the house where you can get a Wi-Fi connection, some type of quiet that you can engage with the person that you're engaging with whilst competing for space with dogs, workers, friends, family, and so forth. So it's just a whole lot more complicated from that point of view. Having said all that, we don't spend 2.5 hours every single day in traffic has been a huge boon. But that world is a different world, and our expectations around it need to adjust accordingly. So we think this is accelerated. We see clients who are saying that they're only coming back in July next year to the office space. You're seeing a lot of organizations giving up office space. So, I think it's going to be an exciting opportunity. We've had some clients who have literally packed up people's offices and delivered it into their home space. And so they've got their desk, they've got their laptop, and they've got everything, their filing cabinet. So they've just translocated their entire office space back home. So it's been sort of quite interesting. In terms of teams itself, some of our experience around individuals is that if you think about team dynamics, you've really got to have the context of the work-home helix. We use the DNA because it's intertwined and connected. You can't now separate work and home from the reality. And so what are individuals starting to think about when you think about their needs? Well, on the top right-hand side, the first part of the pandemic was all about well-being. Are people safe? Are they healthy? And that's sort of morphed into things like, right, so what is going to happen to my career? Do I still have a job? Will I still have a job? How do I stay fit for purpose and relevant? All the social stuff. For those with elderly parents, that doesn't come with a guidebook when you have a pandemic. And so all the concerns around friends, family, and so forth come into mind. These are issues that managers now have to be made part of their playbook. Financial. You may be the sole breadwinner suddenly because of the pandemic. And then physical, am I physically healthy? Am I mentally healthy? That's a big combination. So well-being programs have really kicked in, but a manager has to have his finger on the pulse around well-being, and that becomes quite a big issue. Top left-hand side, it's all about then how do we help people develop or maintain their resilience? How do we keep them in the space of mindfulness? Some people have loved the pandemic because they've been at home the whole time and they've not had to hug anybody or have to have that social awkwardness of being friendly. They've loved it and it's made life a whole lot easier for them. Others have really struggled with the idea that they can't actually have a chat with their friends and they like to see people. And then, of course, we all have to be agile. All of us rationally think that we're hugely agile when it comes to change, but I think that's been truly tested as we've gone along. Right, so I'm just going to check in. The chat box is going in, so that's good. So Sheldon's saying, just an observation from our teams. Some employees seem to be a lot more productive whilst working from home or are rather fearful of returning to the office. Sheldon, yeah, I think that's a big issue. I think managers have to make a judgment call around starting to get people to come back to the office and addressing those fears. Some people are, have expressed fear when in actual fact, they just quite like staying at home. So it's about sort of how do we get the tough love message out there? And, some employees have, for those employees that have just thrived at home and are much more productive and they can contribute from there, we're saying to managers, well, don't force them to come back. Why would you do something of that nature? But it's, horses for courses. Even somebody like myself who loves working from home and don't need a lot of, socializing, after about 3 weeks, I also need to get out. If for no other reason, you just need a change of scenery. So what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of hot desking, a lot of people coming in when and if they feel like doing it. And so it's really going to be, I think, positively messy. And so Margriet's absolutely right. So the guys that are more execution based, in other words, have a task, predominantly task focus basis, like the quiet and the focus of the office of home, whilst others who have get work done through relationships may be struggling a little bit around that, and that'll give you some clues also to how to manage those different people. So guys, keep your questions going. Very happy to engage as we go along. So we got the well-being and the resilience component. We've also got the partnering component. So as individuals, really, none of us can get our jobs done without working really with others. So it's about re-energizing collaboration and finding those people on the team to contribute and partner with. In terms of Margriet and myself, for example, we've, I think, found quite a nice balance between our strengths. I can always rely on Margriet. She's got Maximizer, which is the drive for excellence. So I often ask her to give input to my work that we want to execute. She will often check in around the strategy question if we want to do a different approach with clients and so on. So it's about having connections with who you can partner from that point of view. Now you can't do, I think, the well-being check-in, the resilience stuff or the partnering stuff without knowing your team members very well. And that's why we think strength-based approach to that is useful. And then if you want to get the best out of individuals, bottom left-hand side, it's all about individualization. Each one of us have different needs, and that can be quite dramatically different. And a manager has to be really aware of those. Those are task or execution focused, love ticking things off. How can we help them to do those? Those that are relationship based and need to talk a lot more, and that is okay. There's about issue about accountability. The Gallup research is very clear around this. Even though we don't sit on site, we still have to be accountable for delivery. And this is about having those very explicit conversations with individuals around your expectations as a manager. And this is one of the areas we've always been a little bit bemused by, because when we ask managers, so what do you expect from a Liesel or a Christo or a Brigitte? They go, well, we expect them to do their job. Okay, that's interesting. But how do you really want them to do that? How often do you want them to check in? How do they reassure you? What do they need from you to be successful? And when are you going to draw a line in the sand and say, right, all things being equal, this is what I need from you by then. Remembering you're not going to get that accountability unless you have the purpose, the excitement around what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and so on. And managers in our minds are tremendously poor at having those accountability conversations. They think that they may switch people off, or if they do it in the wrong way, it may be a negative conversation. But the reality is that most of us work far better if we know what our boss expects from us. And the boss can articulate that in a way that is a coaching approach or that meets our needs. They know it's the way that they do it. So accountability has not gone out of fashion. And I am really interested to see over the next several months when the huge corporates start to reactivate their performance management. And if they do it in a traditional way, I think they may switch off a whole lot of people as opposed to using it from a developmental perspective. And then the communication one, I think Liesel's put her finger on that one. The communication one is incredibly important. Some people have complained that it's too much, but our experience is that you cannot over communicate. Now, what does it mean by communicating? So some managers who are dear to our heart go, well, I sent you an email earlier this month. What more do you want from us? No. So communication is that very human thing where even Zoom is perhaps not the best option for that, is to pick up the phone and have a decent conversation. And yes, you can check in. How are you feeling? Are you mindful in the space? Are you switched on to what needs to happen in the workspace, the resilience? Who are you working with now and how can that help? What do you have to deliver by when? If you are task focused, is there something I can connect with you? How can I help you? Or if you're relationship based, how can I have a conversation that will help you stay in the zone and support you in terms of delivery? And what do you need? What information? How can I communicate? And when can I next check in with you? All conversations around the sort of team dynamics, individual lens that a manager can use. And we found that managers who operate in these 6 areas are far more effective in terms of getting their teams to respond to them than those that don't. So I'm just going to check in here again. I've said a lot. Let's see if there are any other contributions. Guys, you're welcome to use the chat button, but I'm going to ask for somebody to be brave and make a comment and talk to us as a real live human being. Anybody like to volunteer? Don't be shy. I'm going to start with Liesel because I know that I can pick on her without her complaining too much. Liesel, what's your view? What resonated? What stands out for you?
The one thing that I was just wondering about the issue of the over communication at the moment, where we said it went from nothing to quite uncomfortable to almost becoming normal.
Yeah.
Is there something in the strengths that would help us understand why some people love it?
Yeah.
And really dive in?
Yeah.
And why others are completely like, whoa, this is too much for me. I'm getting really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Is there something in there?
There is actually. So if you think about strengths, for those that don't know strengths, so Gallup has an assessment called the Clifton Strength Finder, and it assesses your potential in terms of your dominance over 34 strengths or talents. Your number one dominance being the one that you use the most often. Your number 34 is the strength that you perhaps don't use as often, because it's not your key focus or your area of performance. So if you look at your top dominance strength, Liesl, you can start to see where people thrive in areas. So they're either really task focused like myself, or they really out there trying to influence the market, so influencing, or they're relationship based, or they're thinking based, the intellectual sort of strategic space, or combinations of all of those. So I can just use myself as an example. I'm really based on 2, execution and strategic thinking. And so I've been sometimes you can have really awkward conversations with me because you may be in the relationship-based zone and you'll be asking me or communicating to me in stuff that I might find very awkward, or a little bit unusual, because you'll be thinking, say, so Yindor, tell me about your family. I'm going, well, why do you want to talk about my family? Let's talk about the task. And so you can really miss those clues if you don't know how people are showing up or their dominance as employees. Whereas others, if you don't start with the relationship stuff, they will not engage with the task until you go on. So Lisa, tell me about your family. How's the cats doing? All that sort of stuff that's important to them. So really responding to the uniqueness of each of those employees as they are now is the difference between finding a communication approach that works and those communication plans that you see where one size fits all. In the space we now are in, it's not email, I think. It's not trying to communicate like we're trying to do a Section 197 restructure. It's really trying to get the intimacy right with that conversation with the person that you're dealing with, and it's about them, not about you. So as a manager, you have to switch off what you think is important to be finely attuned to what your employees think are important. And that's not always easy because managers have egos. We all think that we know better, and we have our own needs that might be filtering us and helping us perhaps miss what is important. I don't know, that's probably a 3-day work program. We can just have a conversation on that.
Yeah, but then you can also say, so what about the poor manager? What if he has no relationship strengths, he or she? So, yeah.
Well, funny you should ask, so I've been a manager before, and Margaret will laugh. We will leave it whether I was a good one or a bad one. But I have no relationship strengths in my top 10. Yet I have friends. I do have a wife. I do have kids, and the dogs don't bite me when I go home. So the question really about this is about how do you use your strengths to achieve intentional outcomes in different spaces. So I would use my learner, which is my curiosity mechanism. I would use my strategic strength. I would use my ideation. And essentially the way I build relationships with others is because I'm curious about them. I can ask these types of questions, and I will naturally then engage at different levels in terms of their needs because I'm curious about it. So I can switch that on and I can turn the volume up. Margaret, I don't know if you want to come in there and add to that.
Yeah, Yindor, when you're done, I see Ron has unmuted himself. You're now back on mute, Ron. Did you want to add anything?
Oh, good.
Well, actually, sorry, I've got to jump onto something else in 3 minutes, so I thought I wouldn't share, but I'll quickly share. Yeah, thank you. Fascinating discussion. What I was thinking about was the matching of the leader's style and it's one thing for the leader to become aware of their strengths and really how that plays out in this new context. But then I was kind of thinking about the need for the followers in a way to know that themselves as well and what they need. And it's really a two-way street. Yeah. Probably practically, as a consultant and intervention, the starting point is with the leader and their self-awareness. Yeah. And but I guess the later stages would be building the awareness of the whole system. So that's what I was starting to reflect on.
Ron, sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, but essentially spot on. And what always amazes us is that folk do not share their strengths, express their needs to the team. So often they leave the team to guess. And that's always a recipe for assumption, usually misassumption. And it can raise itself in very practical ways. Is what type of communication do I need? Typically with leaders, they will send emails at 2 o'clock in the morning, and do they expect people to respond? And so you can have a really worthwhile conversation where the manager sits down and says, listen, guys, here are my strengths. This is how I liked to operate. How can we complement each other? What do you need from me? What do I need from you? And let's have an expectations conversation. It can be very powerful right now. So I think that's spot on in terms of where you want to go with that. But we find too often that the manager doesn't want to have that conversation because they think that it'll expose them. But from a strength point of view, it won't. Or alternatively, they don't have a language or a way to do that makes sense, and they may not be self-aware. So, all of those things I think come to play. Myrna, I saw your hand up, so I don't know if you want to contribute. Thanks, Ron.
Certainly. One of the things.
Apologies.
Okay, thanks, Ron.
One of the interventions, tasks that we do in the purposeful teams is to go through a little bit of a thing that judges what type of personality you are. So from that, we identify black holes and blind spots. You're not quite telling us what your strengths finder is doing. So yes, we know we're dysfunctional at the moment, but what is it that the teams are going to get out of it? Is it about identifying blind spots, black holes, and then for the leader then to have a deeper understanding of who they're dealing with so that they can appropriately tailor conversations to be more effective? What is it? What's the meat behind Strengths Finder? That's question one. But question two for me is quite interesting because I did Strengths Finder 20 years ago while at SAB. It was a big thing for us then, the Gallup Strengths Finder. And I did it 6 months ago with another Janet, one of your Strengths Finder ladies. And it was such a surprising revelation for me that my top 5 strengths stayed the same, order changed. So in the different environments in which I work, it's as though, so individualization was no longer my top strength, it became my third strength, and strategic jumped right up, activate the following. So it was quite interesting how, because of the situation and the work I was doing, things swapped around, but never changed in essence. The top
thanks, Myrna. Two great questions. Is there a third one?
No, I said it was similar to the Enneagram. Same thing when you do it in different spaces, your wing.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for those two questions. Just to give you a very brief sort of insight to that. From a strength-based point of view, it's a behavioral assessment, very similar to what you would see on Insights or Enneagram. But the departure point is trying to identify what you potentially are good at, your talents. Talent is a potential. A strength then would tell you about how you use your talents in near perfect performance. So a talent or a strength in our terminology is how you do something. It's the execution of your potential. So Roger Federer is talented in tennis playing, would be a typical example. Strengths would determine about how he approaches the tennis game, and it's different to skill from that point of view or competence. So we always say to a leader, first of all, understand what your talents and strengths are and what you bring to the party. So we start with their assessment, so they know how they show up. And often that could be, sometimes it's balcony. In other words, you're using your strength appropriate to the context. Okay. We use the terminology of balcony because you stand on a balcony and you can survey the terrain and you can navigate intentionally in a way that has a positive impact. Or it could be obstacle. So much as a skill can be overused, you can overuse a strength in the wrong context. So strengths for us is about how you can show up: execution, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking, and how you can use them intentionally and appropriately in combination with each other. So that's what the Strength Finder does. So you can have a basement where the person is blind to that. They've learned something totally new about themselves, or alternatively, they're not using the strength in appropriate fashion, or the volume is too loud for that context. So sometimes not everything's execution or requires execution in that space. Strengths we think are as stable as your personality over time, though it can lead to very different types of behaviors. So your strengths, you're born with them. So it's a uniqueness or a DNA characteristic of yourself. That's why you can't be well-rounded in all things to all people. But you know, how you behave as a 7-year-old should be quite different to how you behave as a 40-year-old, or some cases not, depending on maturity and all that good stuff. But your strengths more or less stay the same. And the difference between, say, your number 1 strength and, say, your number 10 strength, or still in the dominance one, is not so large that they can't slightly change, but they stay relatively stable from that point of view. So we think it's a fantastic tool to help managers and teams really gain greater insight. It's the one that we like, but we're multi-methodological. So we'll often combine it with an insights view or a Enneagram view or whatever. You know, I think you can use a different, the more insight you have, we think the better. So Myrna, I don't know if that very quickly answers those types of questions.
Yes, no, certainly it does. Especially with the help within the team, because doing the work with Janet was extremely helpful for me. But what I'm not seeing it come across in your presentation, just an understanding for me of, okay, so you strategic, we will have a challenge interacting because 2 strategic people have these things that go on in the relationship. So this is what happens to us when we interact. Be aware of it. And those were such important insights for me.
No, absolutely. And I'm going to ask you to be a bit patient, because that's where I think the case study is going to help us to provide a little bit more insight. So the focus here is really on sort of our learnings around some teams, and we'll give some insights. But the clues that you're looking for, Myrna, which are great questions, actually, hopefully we'll show you when we look at a team grid for an executive team that we're working with, and we can start to really tease out some of those insights. You've just had the luxury of having gone through the Strength Finder. We could not assume that for others, though of course we'll encourage you to take it, of course.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good. Anybody else that'd like to give some insight or ask, or what they're still wondering about? Liesl, anything further? All right. So Jenna says, my question to the team would be, do they feel that the communication is purposeful and focused? Yeah, Jenna, I think you're filtering your own talents there and your needs. I think it's a great question. Managers often communicate and then ask the question is, does this work? And so that type of check-in, which is a coaching question, I think could be really valuable. So yeah, I think spot on. Right. Any last thoughts, Liesl, before we move on?
No, I'm good. I quite like what Roy put in the chat function. He said, I love the link that strengths in the Enneagram had. It was a confirmation on one side, but also the strengths gave me different language into work with, in self-reflection. It's cool.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you want to bring more insights in terms of your experience of strengths and the Enneagram, Liesl. I mean, I think that's a really nice input.
Yeah, I think, look, I love working with the Enneagram and have been working with it for a while. And in that time, I think did a whole bunch of other assessments as well, out of curiosity. Yes. And very few of them told me anything that I haven't yet learned about the Enneagram.
Yeah.
It confirmed what the Enneagram assessment or report said about me. But strengths brought a different angle.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the opposite. It was complementary and gave me specific talents that I might not have focused on that much. It's more, it zooms in more on things that And suddenly it gave me a different sense of courage in some areas of my life.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
So yeah, so I loved working with it.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's been I've been through very many assessments purely because we work with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm very,
exactly.
but yeah.
And Lisa, your experience really mirrors mine. You know, I grew up with the Enneagram, and then we've added strengths to our lexicon. And I think what we've liked about it is that, and we've done hundreds of them now, is that people really, it resonates with people because it's done in a way and in a language that they can go, aha, that's me. Gee, I'm wondering about this. And then the second thing, which I think is hugely valuable, is that strengths then is very practical about, right, so this is who you are. What can you do with it? And I think also the Enneagram asks that question. But I think it's, knowing who you are is great. And the manager may become very self-aware. But if they don't know how to use it, it's not as effective. And I think sometimes in psychometrics will tell you a little bit about who you are, but man, to translate that into something practical is really quite difficult. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think, the strengths for me is very accessible around, if you're an achiever, yeah, 3 or 4 things that you can really do to ramp up that volume or turn it down or, use it in combination. And it's the combination stuff that we think is quite powerful.
And there's definitely, so much value in working with both of those tools in the team. Where if it's just used for individual coaching, then there's great self-development. But to know these things about your team members, that's where the magic lies.
Yeah, no, I think that's the light bulb moment. And I don't know if Krista is still with us, but I mean, Krista and myself, had that experience using strengths and the Enneagram on our Ready to Lead program together. And we found that it doesn't matter how you get to the end goal, whether it's through strengths or the Enneagram, it gives you 2 sides of the same coin. The value is the impact around what can you do with it and who are you leading. So I think those are valuable insights. Good. Okay, guys, we're going to segue a little bit now, and I think Myrna's really helped us to catalyze the fact is why do we think this is so important? So I think what keeps organizations and individuals at this time from leveraging their innate talents is this question. Most people are either unaware of or unable to describe their own strengths or what they bring to the party or the strengths of others, which I think what Liesel's really putting her finger on. And so we think the manager's experience is a balancing act. So the nice thing about what we always like to do with these things is that there is some free collateral. It's called the Manager Experience from Gallup. It's a nice 40-page research piece around all the complexities of managing at the current moment. For those that want it, they can request it. We'll send that out for free to you as part of being on this webinar. But what are some of the things that we need organizations to do? We need them to rethink what it means to be a manager. So as much as managers have to be clear to their team, the organization needs to be clear to the manager what they should be doing at this stage. And this is where we think HR, learning and development, OD, consultants, and all the rest, essentially the guys on this webinar, need to play a catalytic role around, right, so what do we need to do right now? What are the most important things? Can we give tools and approaches to managers that make sense? We want managers to shift from boss to coach. Leave the hierarchy and the authority at the door. Let's have those great workplace coaching conversations. I think, from us that develop managers is have the right managers. And I think you will very quickly find whether those that are struggling, those that have the potential to step up, and those that are just simply wrong for the role. Make sure that your manager training is relevant to what they need now. So a lot of the stuff that we learned on MBA programs, interesting, but how to be a workplace coach, better. We require our leaders to keep connecting with managers. So as much as managers have to be the role model at this stage, our execs, our leaders need to work with the managers because they are leaders of others or leaders of managers, and to keep connecting, energizing, coaching their managers and helping them out. They can't do it in a vacuum. and ensure, guys, that your talent pipeline is working. So who are those heroes in teams that you can elevate to playing very different roles into helping teams collaborate and work better? So the manager experience, it's a balancing act. So for those that want the piece of collateral, please reach out to us. We'll give you some information at the end to connect with us, or you can go through Roy and Liesel, but we're happy to share that. It gives a far more in-depth background to what we're saying. So some of the numbers, because the numbers are always important because performance does matter. For those that are interested in strength-based development, what we're going to show you in the case study is that we think strength-based development driving individual performance works. This is a meta-analysis done in 2015, but essentially in the best organizations, when compared with their peers, so it's a benchmark, employees who receive strength-based development and conversations were found to have an 18% increase in direct performance. And you can imagine, if we use your strengths better, or you play to your strengths, you're going to perform better because that's what you're good at. 10% increase in customer metrics. Man, during the pandemic, customer is everything. This could be quite significant in terms of upside. And I wish my bank actually listened, because their customer metrics during the pandemic has been horrible. The other day I had to go into the branch and it took me 2 hours to get into the branch, let alone get service. 73% lower attrition for the good people. 23% increase in employee engagement, and a 10% increase in citizenship. In other words, being able to talk well about the organization, its customers, and the environment, almost a positivity. So that really is some of the upside of doing this well, or those metrics. The three that we look at, particularly when we work with teams, is performance, engagement, and the customer. So our customers will always benefit if the team performs better, and they will perform better if they're motivated to do that. And so we then have a combination of view around engagement, performer, and customer. And I'm going to stop there because Myrna has raised her hand. So Myrna, please crack on.
Just a quick one, Yendo. One of the rules in employee engagement is to get to know your individuals. So just by companies engaging with you and bringing your skills on board and interacting with employees, that would probably contribute for 10% of the increase in performance. I mean, just by a company selecting the Strengths Finder to come into the organization and develop these insights, employees are now feeling heard.
Yes.
Just by you being there, just by them being able to do that, which is phenomenal. People don't realize that employees just want you to get to know them.
Yeah,
just time.
100%. So, but I covered a couple of experiences and caveats here. One is that if you're an organization that sends out an employee engagement survey once a year, that's not getting to know That's not getting to know your staff members. It's around intimacy and really then hearing what they're saying and doing something about it. So a lot of organizations during the pandemic have surveyed their employees to death. And all they're doing is creating metadata to give sort of the leadership reassurance that, nobody's died. So there's literal, are you healthy or not healthy? Are you mentally well or not? Are you feeling able to cope with change? That's all interesting stuff, but a lot of organizations then have made created two problems for themselves. One is they've got all this metadata, then they've got too much data and they don't know what to do with it. So they haven't gone back to people and said, you said X, Y, and Z, our response is A, B, C. Okay, so that's a problem, because then you get survey fatigue, and the next time that you do it, people just don't answer. And then the second one is that people get lost in the metadata. So 73% of you said we need to communicate more. So now we're communicating more does not speak to Yendo in his broom cupboard in Edenvale trying to do the best job he can. That's where managers and talking and conversing with people as real human beings is what we think engagement is now all about. So yes, do surveys, but do something with it, and do get your managers in the game to translate that into conversation. I think, Myrna, we spot on. I think you're spot on with that. But it's that intimacy that's important. Okay, nice. Thank you. So Nicholas says, exactly, and then so what? Absolutely right. Don't ask for feedback if you don't want the answer. Yeah, because a lot of organizations now have used an engagement methodology that have gone into some really tricky water. Like, so tell me, do you think that you are being paid enough? Yeah, interesting question. But do you want to ask that right now? I'm not convinced that that's a relevant question right now. So, I think that knee-jerk engagement surveys, you got to really sort of be dragons and apply your mind as to whether it's relevant. But engagement per se, we think mission critical. Right. So thanks, Myrna. Anybody else that has a different insight or a contrary point or contrarian report or want to arm wrestle? Right, so we've got about 40 minutes left, guys. I want to jump now from all our learnings and some of the inputs straight into the case study, because I think it'll bring it to life and you can test some of your assumptions on what you're still wondering about, because I still want to leave a little bit of time at the end for some type of questions. So before we get to the case study, I'm going to give you some background to it. So we're working currently with an executive team in the telecoms industry. They shall remain nameless. They currently are, what I would say to you, they're quite a strong executive team. They run a very successful business historically, and they're well thought of by their shareholders and their board. They have really two strategic agenda items. The one is that they're currently facing a concentration risk around some of their big customers. So they're looking to diversify. At the same time, because of that, they've started a merger and acquisition process. And they've just hit, when we started to work with them, they just hit the lockdown on the pandemic. So you can imagine they are solid citizens, run a really nice business, quite a deep experienced executive team, and now they have two major challenges: the pandemic, which has changed the question around how they make money, and secondly, they're halfway through a merger and acquisition, so some really complex dynamics around what is happening. What I'm going to show you is a strength grid for this group. So it looks like that. It's quite in depth, so I'm going to just first of all give you a bit of signposting around how to read it. Then I'm going to show you a little bit about a strategic level team conversation, a tactical level team conversation, and then an individual team conversation that you can have with using a strength-based tool that we have here, but you may want to use Enneagram or Insights or whatever your favorite is. So keep in mind, telecoms, quite a rapidly changing business. Government is changing the questions around broadband and so forth. They're doing a merger, what I always call a merger and acquisition, because that's always quite interesting. They have to deal with the pandemic. They're a highly technical IT-based operational business. So, their guys on the ground are mission critical. And now we've chucked all of this sort of hand grenade into goldfish bowl. So what you see is you can start to see from left to right, we have 4 categories: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. So just to signpost, because it's always quite funny with South African audiences, strategic thinking is real work. So even if you sit and think, it is valuable and it's part of what needs to happen. The 34 strengths are from achiever on the left, right through to strategic and so forth on the right-hand side. And you can start to see the strengths broken up into the categories: execution, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. We think a good team needs to operate in all 4 quadrants, though no team is perfectly distributed in terms of its strengths. So we're not looking for perfect distribution, but we are looking that each team, to be successful, needs to be able to execute. They need to be able to influence the market, so an external viewpoint. They need to be able to build relationships and work with each other. And they need to think about strategy. What is the aim and purpose of the team? So, and then of course on the total left-hand side, we've got the team members. We've taken the names out, but team member 1 through to 9. And so you'll start to see that in terms of dominance, this team is highly strategic thinking focused, and they're highly execution focused. Okay, so that should give you some nice clues in terms of where their dominant is. And so you can see this in a technical business like telecoms. They're strategically agile. They know what the future looks like. They can change. They don't understand technology and the optionality around that. At the same time, they can get the job done. They drive performance relentlessly, and they can get things done. Then next comes relationship building. So there is you can start to see in this group, there is a need around working together, recognizing the individual and building those relationships. And then the area where they don't have as much dominance is the influencing. Now, you can start to think about this strategically. Right, so this group, execution and strategically thinking is strong. Historically, they've been very successful, but the pandemic now has changed the balance here. And the merger and acquisition has changed the balance. And so what conceivably we may want to have a conversation with this team is to start to say, right, so what do you as a team need to do to be successful now during the pandemic and during this merger and acquisition whilst keeping the lights open for the current business? So what should you be doing more of? What should you be doing less of? And what should you be turning the volume up with? And you can start to see some interesting things. We need to keep the execution going because that pays the bills. At the same time, we've got to ramp up the influencing because we're under merger and acquisition. At the same time is that we've got to really build great relationships because we want to get our teams really focused and sustain our team energy over this period, whilst we've got to think some optionalities. So what do we need to switch on and switch off? And so that's one of the strategic conversations we had with them to say, well, hold on, where can we turn the volume up? Where can we turn the volume down? So for example, during the pandemic, you cannot be as efficient as you used to be. Fact. So part of this is to say, well, it's real work to think about strategy. It's real work to think about influencing the market and our merger. And it's real work to think about an internal lens around relationship building. And so we've got them to start to shift about what their day job looks like. And so their day job now is to hold the confidence of the merger and acquisition team, to build great relationships and to build on what they have in place around the operation team, to think about what they should be doing differently whilst they're influencing the relationships stuff's going on, and knowing that they may not be as effective or as efficient in terms of their customers as historically they've been doing so. So they've been communicating much more with their acquisition target. They've been engaging their clients in different ways. They've been thinking about optionalities around how to help their clients whilst the operations may not be as efficient as possible. And so a strength-based approach can give you a really nice insight into a strategic level. So then we can also think about tactical level. So if we look at in each one of the categories, we can now think about where the dominance lies. So for example, if we take the team member level, you can see the aggregation and where they are strong within each sphere. So in executing, for example, responsibility and achiever are very strong. And what this suggests to people is that, that they are going to take their execution and their customer very seriously, and the achiever is going to drive execution, but we need to manage those expectations, the volume of that. Because if I'm trying to achieve and I'm being prevented by the pandemic from achieving or executing, my responsibility may go increase in volume, and I may really then try and drive what is not practical. So we start to think about pairings and combinations of what is happening here. So for this team, we got them to turn down the execution a little bit to help us engage in other areas. So if we look at strategic thinking, for example, their learner and futuristic are quite dominant. So they have this ability to anticipate what may be coming. They can learn very quickly, and that combination has now fed their expectation around responsibility and achiever. So they're starting to say, listen, the old way of driving performance is not working. What can we anticipate? What can we learn? And how can we change the way we think about performance that will help us not to get frustrated or to use a hammer for every objective that we're trying to achieve? Then if we look at the relationship building, we can see that they predominantly relator. Now, relator is a strength where people with relator create very deep and intimate relationships, but with friends and few colleagues. So they are not naturally going to now think about that everybody in their business needs to be communicated to, engaged with, and so forth. They won't naturally think that way. So we got them to realize that maybe relator could be an obstacle to thinking about communication and engagement. And so there are other ways of thinking about that, and they could use their communication team. They've switched their marketing team to much more of an internal marketing worldview, and they've got their management team to start to think a little bit about how do we keep that engagement focus going. So that could have been a bit of an obstacle to them, but we helped them to think through around mitigants and complementarity. And then when we look at influencing, we can start to think a little bit about, well, there's not a lot of dominance here, though we can see that there are quite a few people with maximizer, which is the drive for excellence. So they're starting to think about, right, so during this change, how do we maintain an excellent form of performance, even though that may have changed in terms of our thinking? What we would say to the people that around the influence stuff is that we're not going to fire people and hire more people with yellow. Okay, that's tempting to do, and that would be sort of a competency-based view. In terms of strength-based view, we say is how can we use our dominance, our strategic thinking, and our executing strength, combine them to intentionally create an influencing outcome. Right, so the first thing we can do is we can look at all the maximizers. We can look at those with command to give us reassurance and self-assurance and so forth. We can use those individually, but we can start to think a little bit about saying, if I have some great alternatives, I have the credibility of execution, and I talk to the market in a way that makes sense to them, I'm going to be influential. So you can think about it strategically, you can think about it tactically, and then when you get down to the individual level, you can think about it in terms of personal and individuals themselves. So if you look at team members 1 through to 9, you can see this is their top 10. You can see where they're strong at and perhaps where they're not so strong at. So those with individualization, for example, could be really useful to get the internal communication and engagement going. They could complement those that are very high on the executing strengths domain. And so you can start to think about working with this from a complementary partnership point of view. So as we were changing the way that we think about performance, as we were changing the way we were thinking about relationship building and influencing the market, we were starting to think about how do we pair or create groups within this team to drive those agenda items across the organization. So some members would be better at the internal communication and engagement stuff. Others would be more externally focused with the influencing. Others would then be thinking about strategic or combinations of those, and others would be working with the operational execution teams to keep the lights on. So really we were able down to individuals and to pairs to really drive horses for courses. And so I'm going to stop there because Myrna has raised her hand and we can engage. Myrna.
Oh, yeah. Be asking questions.
No, go for it.
Change management leadership put an engine on change management.
Mm-hmm.
So with this company currently in the situation of doing a merger and acquisition, don't you think having such few influencers could inhibit that process, with the thought that leaders put an engine on change management?
Yeah. And so the answer would be yes, unless they are not aware of it. Because they are now aware of it, this executive team deliberately then looked at, so it doesn't mean, some people have a lot of influencing there. So we could turn that volume up with those individuals, but they're now thinking about their strengths in an intentional way, saying, listen, we're not naturally going to think about change as a catalyst in an engine room unless we intentionally think about it. And now they can say, well, what is our strategy? What is our future world look like? How do we need to change performance? How do we need to keep those relationships going so that we can get through the change process and so forth? And because we now intentionally got them to think about how to use their other strengths to be influential, this is going far better than perhaps we anticipated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And so, Myrna, it's about that awareness, so if you, in my case, if you don't have relationship dominant, then you start to say well, I know that I don't do this naturally, so I need to check in with how I'm doing that. So it becomes a task around your achiever to do that. And it's about awareness that you may forget the people when you're talking about tasks, in my case. And it's very similar to this team, that change and external relationship management is not their natural space, but they can get there if they're aware of it and they intentionally use their other strengths to achieve that as an outcome. That's why we're not going to fire this whole team and get more people with yellows. Definitely. Having said that, they've got enough yellows there to start, and they did, to start that conversation about, right, it's not about us, it's about others. So how do we keep that worldview in mind when we think about alternatives and stuff? Yeah. Okay.
No, definitely. Just
Ron,
purely awareness.
Yeah.
I do believe the Strengths Finder gives you that awareness so that you can put things into place, because in a change management process, leaders are very important in the process. If they don't have that influence, what do we need to ramp up on in order for this process to be smoother?
Absolutely. So that, Ron, I will come to you now. So the two things there, Myrna, that was quite important for this team. One is the awareness that what worked for them, their needs, was not what their clients, what their acquisition or their staff members needed from them now at this stage. And so, so a lot of teams fall into this trap, which is, I'm okay, and this is what I need, but they don't answer the client question. Definitely. Sorry, guys, there's somebody without their mute on. If you could just mute, please.
It's Ron.
Okay, sorry.
I was just trying to ask you a question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Ron, we'll be with you in 2 seconds. So just to finish. So, Myrna, you're absolutely spot on. So, you can take a change lens, you can take a sort of business as usual, or usually what happens with the pandemic. They've got how do I respond to a crisis? How do I maintain my credibility in the marketplace because I'm acquiring something? And how do I keep my lights and water on? Because at the end of the day, we can't acquire anything if our customers aren't happy. So it's quite a complicated thing that they're doing. What we liked about the process is when you go through strategic, tactical, and individual, we came up with a game plan where each individual executive knew what the role they needed to play over and above their functional role. What were they going to say to their managers? What were they going to say to their clients? What they're going to say to the market? And what are they going to say to the operations people? And that game plan was a very practical way of thinking about how to help them through that situation. And that's what we thought the power of it was, because they had some great strengths which they needed to nurture. They needed to turn the volume of some things they were doing, but they also had to change, which is your point. Brilliant. Right, Ron, you were going to ask a question.
Yes. Sorry, I have to step out for a little bit, so I might have missed something, but let me ask my question anyway. It's a kind of methodological question.
Yeah. Right. Ron, you've hung up.
But can you hear me, Yendel?
I can now. Do you want to just switch your video off just so that we can get your audio
through?
Sure. Because you just, there we go. Yeah, go for it. Methodological, yeah?
What I was saying was, I think is know that and adapt.
Sorry,
and
Ron,
if
you're really breaking up. I didn't hear any of that. Do you want to just type?
I wonder if Ron, maybe if you can type your question.
Yeah.
Because you're breaking up even with your video off. Linda, I'm thinking maybe take Nicola's question so long while Ron types his.
Fantastic. Sorry, Nicola, I didn't see you there. So Nicola, go for it.
Nikki, your turn. She raised her hand and then she went to the kitchen or something.
Yeah. Nicola, I know that you're on mute. You raised your hand. Do you have a question for us?
No. Okay.
Okay. Ron, I don't know if
Hi.
you meant it.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry. The
No
button
problem.
doesn't want to work. Apologies. Thanks, Liesl. So my question was following Myrna's question. First of all, thank you for this really great discussion. Following Myrna's question around change and the management and change, I mean, I think the terminology is expired now, and we really need to find something more appropriate to call what we do in managing transition. But yeah, you know, just an insight from you around how much pre-engagement they did before you came into working with them, around before the decision to acquire was made, if it was, because often I think the terminology or the catchphrase merger and acquisition, I think is incorrectly organized. It's usually an acquisition that's made fait accompli, and then the merger takes place afterwards. And you know, it leaves everyone to say, well, you know, it's the decision's been made by executives, by the shareholders. Now we have to adjust, and then of course that brings into the spotlight the role of OD and change. But yeah, it is you know, it's something I just wanted to know, because it's also making me remember or recalling the principles of the worldview and ontology and around the ENA. The framework is that we need to understand the difference between the emerging problems that prompt the merger and the underlying cause of the problems that may have been there and may continue to be there unless the work is done. And so I just want the insights in what you discovered when you started working with them.
That's Nicola, thanks. That's a great question. So in any type of teamwork you do, you cannot divorce the team from the strategic context and what's happening. So, you know, as practitioners, we always have two sides of the coin, which is the commercial and then, of course, the people side. In this case, they started and I always call it murder and acquisition for the reasons I think, Nicola, you referred to. They started that sort of last year already. So they sort of, when the pandemic came, they were sort of halfway through that. We came on board really to help them because they were aware that you know, what works in the past was not going to work for them in the future. So their futuristic strength, they were deeply aware. And remember, this is a mature team, and they're pretty good. They were aware that they needed a check to make sure that they needed to understand how to respond to what was changing, not just the merger. So bless that. I mean, they really turned up the volume of their strategic thinking, and they checked to see whether the merger and acquisition was still relevant to what they were trying to do and the pandemic and how the world's changed. And the answer to that was yes. So they had the maturity to do that. So they weren't, you know, had they needed to switch that off or stop that they could have done that. The bigger question for us around, so we inherited that sort of as an ambiguity question, which is, right, so we think that the merger and acquisition is still relevant. We do have to diversify even more so around that. We do have to keep the lights and water on. We do have to keep the market happy that we have the capacity to do that. So we're not going to be punished with that. And we still have to keep our teams on side. I think what has happened is it's really slowed down their ability to change. The pandemic that's been the real impact. And so what we've really tried to help them to think about as well is, how do you sustain the energy around the pandemic and the potential around the merger? over an extended period. So this is really death by 100 cuts as opposed to death by 10 cuts, and then we get it done, because both sides now are sort of anticipating a merger and a new OD and a new organogram and new people around the table and all that sort of stuff. And so it's it's been quite tiring for them. So how do we keep the energy around the possibility, keeping the lights on, and so forth? And it's holding that ambiguity in their minds that's been quite tricky. And so we've really been spending quite a lot of time thinking about that as a leadership question and helping them roll out relevant engagement and communication and all that good stuff. So Nicola, sort of a question that needs about 3 hours to unpack, but hopefully that gives you a couple of steers around that. Is that helpful? Does that make sense? Okay, so whilst Nicola finds her mute button, right, so Ron has asked a question around methodology, so I'm just going to read that quickly. So Ron says, Strength Finder is about knowing yourself. I would say knowing yourself and others. I understand the shadow aspects of strengths overused. Yeah, it could also be a blind spot, or it could be an old-fashioned weakness, actually. You said one could also use Enneagram, which goes a bit deeper and explores shadow aspects more. So we think that strengths is multi-dimensional. So we think that there's a sufficient depth there to think a little bit about what we would call balconies using appropriately, and basements, which would be your shadow. The difference in methodologies, if you know the systems a bit, really how far to go into depth limiting patterns as well as going into strengths. Yeah, so what we say, Ron, is that not everybody has strengths. They may have underdeveloped or have not developed their talents yet. So the first move is to think a little bit about, is this a potential, or is it something you can really use, and how to develop that? The second thing is strength does not ignore weaknesses, or I think a little bit around what you would call shadow. It's just that we find that spending a lot of time in weakness fixing may not be relevant and may not give you the performance uplift that you're looking for. So if I use the analogy of an airline pilot, strengths will not teach you how to fly an aircraft. You need the competence of how to fly an aircraft, but strengths will tell you how this person is going to fly. In other words, in a disciplined or non-disciplined way, how they're going to manage an asset of $400 million, how they're going to deal with a crew of 20 and 400 passengers, and the vagrancies of what could happen at any time in the air. That would be a strengths question. So perhaps that will give you some insight to that. So we think that the combination of strengths and its multidimensionality gives you a depth probably equal to, I think, the Enneagram. The big difference for us is we think strengths answers the question of what to do with them in a much more practical way than perhaps other systems do. That would be a personal view. I'd like to invite our Enneagram experts to add to that if they would like, but we've just found strengths as a practical how-to once you know about them. Okay, so I don't know, Ron, if that gives you a little bit of insight to that. You're nodding, which is great. You're not showing me rude signs. Thank you. You're not showing me rude signs, which is also a possibility. For those that are more expert in Enneagram, I don't know, Liesl, if you want to add to that before I get to Krista's question. So Chris has responded. He says, interesting, Ron. I think Enneagram brings to work with strengths exactly the shadow aspect or issues around fixation, that which keeps us from using our strengths or misusing them. Okay, spot on. Fantastic. Right, Ron, you've given us a thumbs up, so that is all good. Any other questions now, guys, about the case study? We've got about 12 minutes left, so I'm going to bring sort of my content part of the process to an end. What it's fantastic is I think that we can have a far deeper and longer conversation, but we don't have that luxury. But any last minute thoughts, left field considerations? Have we missed something? Do you, and I always love this part, does anybody violently disagree? Please do that. Myrna, we're going to have to charge you by the question from now on, but please go ahead.
No, I was just looking at the numbers and the rating between 1 and 10 as to the strongest strength is diluted. Do you take that into account when you're analyzing the team? Because for me, I had a look, and a lot of the 1s and 2s and 3s are in strategic. So does that add to the strength of that at all?
Yes. relatively so, but not materially. So yes, there's a difference between 1 and 10, but because 1 through to 10 is what we call dominance, you'll be able to use all 10 of those in some format quite easily. Where it becomes interesting, of course, is if you look at your bottom 5 or 6, which we really call sort of lesser strengths. There's a big difference between dominance and lesser. You can spend time in your lesser, but you really have to spend a huge amount of frustration, energy to get anything out. So I'll give you a good sense. My number 34 is empathy. So I don't naturally understand where others are coming from. I really have to ask, and until I learned that asking people where they're really coming from is okay, I would often miss the empathy stuff and really be in the execution task stuff. I can go on 100 empathy training programs, typically in the old HR terms when I was still in HR, you can send me on EQ, but you're wasting your time. The better question for me is how do I use my strategic and my execution to put on the agenda that I have to check in with people, and I can turn the curiosity factor up, and I get great results with that. So the better question for me is how do I combine my top 10 in different ways to get an exponential outcome, rather than thinking about strengths as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's interesting, but the pairing is much more powerful.
Okay. No, brilliant. Thanks.
Excellent. I think these are not to prefigure, but if folk are interested, we should probably have a strengths Enneagram webinar. There could be quite a lot of interest in that, and that could be a fascinating topic. We can get Christo and yourself involved in that. Roy says that would be cool. Fantastic.
It would be an interesting discussion, I have to say.
Exactly. Well, as long as people believe that strengths is right and Enneagram's wrong, we'd be fine. I mean, of course.
Yeah, sure.
No.
Answer the question. I am also an Enneagram, accredited Enneagram specialist, but have done the strengths through Janet and
Guys,
both are equally valid in completely different ways. They are,
exactly.
but they're both very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we just happen to like and enjoy and work with strengths, but we are very open to multi-methodological. I think, and, we've proven the point. Krista and myself run a little program called Ready to Lead. It's about helping people take a step to being managers. And we use the strengths and the Enneagram in the same program. And we really get very nice results out of that because, different things switch on different people, which is the message, isn't it? You're unique and, whatever works for you. But, the Enneagram shows sides of strengths and strengths shows sides of Enneagram. And you can have a very meaningful conversation around that. Our message around this is just, we love strengths because it's a coaching language that works for us, but we use other tools and we think we're complementary. So we would never go, listen, you either drink the Kool-Aid of strengths or nothing. We think life is far more complicated and interesting than that. So, I love this Enneagram. I grew up in the Enneagram. I've added strengths to that. Margaret is much more comfortable in going NLP route and strengths. Man, you are only limited by your curiosity and, your intent. So, with folk like Lerner and, Margaret and myself have Lerner in our top 10. And yes, we just love fiddling with the stuff, and, you're just only constrained by your curiosity and intellect. So, yeah. So Roy says that would be cool. Strengths versus Enneagram in the context of maturity or integration. That sounds quite techy. I'm happy to explore all of that good stuff. So Roy, the answer would be yes. I'm very conversant, Liesl. We've got 6 minutes left. I did promise that we can send out the free collateral. I think to make it easier, I'm going to send the free collateral to Roy, and he can just email it to everybody, and then they have it. If it's useful, that's great. If it's not useful, stick it in your folder thing and all that good stuff. I think, Roy, if you're okay with that, I think that'll just make it easier. Yeah. Roy says perfect. Good.
Cool. And maybe, Yendor, while most people are still on the call, can we launch New Manager Lite?
Of course you can. Of course. Ron, it's okay. You'd be surprised what I've been called. Vendor is close enough, so Yendor's okay. Autocorrect is a bugger, isn't it? Fantastic. Yeah, Liesel, go for it. New Manager Bootcamp, exciting new thing that we're launching. Go.
Yeah, so it was interesting. It came from one of Yendor's clients that wanted to do manager development, and we thought about how can we take the Worldsphere New Manager Bootcamp, make it a little bit lighter, because it was also a client that's not in South Africa, so the CETA accreditations and stuff wasn't that important, and they had a little bit of less time. And how can we incorporate StrengthsFinder? So we've designed a 3-day management development program that, Yendor, I was expecting a slide, but I'm going to try and speak from 100% memory.
All is possible.
That in the Worldsphere style, where we go from self to others to organization, the first day focuses on what does management and leadership look like in our organization, and then me choosing to be a manager, and we bring a lot of strength stuff into that day, into the conversation. Day 2 then goes into managing others. So we look at team dynamics, and we look at essential conversations or difficult conversations. Also bringing strengths into those conversations. And then in day 3, we look at managing the organization. So there we bring in the employee life cycle. We have generic models that we can introduce, or if the organization has one that they use. And then managing organizational change, and again bringing strengths into that conversation. So it's quite a cool little management development program that we're quite proud of. We have one client who definitely wants it already, and another client who's verbally said, yes, we want to send people on that, and we're looking at soon having that as a public program. Where people can send 1 or 2 or 3 of their new managers, or people that are earmarked for promotion on this program.
Yeah. Lisa, what I think our client really liked about this and why they bought it is that it has all the combinations of things that people think and have come up in this webinar. So this idea about, right, so the absolute importance and centrality of a manager and choosing to be a manager. Not all of us should be managing people. You know, not everybody should have a pet. Not everybody should be a manager is usually what I say. Then, of course, the whole team dynamic stuff that we got very excited about, hopefully over this webinar, and the essential coaching approach. And then how do we manage it across the employee life cycle? Because there is an organizational context. And then, of course, the big one that I think Myrna's really raised with us is, listen, this management stuff is hard, but it's even harder when you're undergoing huge amount of change at the same time, which is, I think, a little bit about what the case study is there to teach us. So it really captured, I think, the attention of our client, because it ticks all those boxes that I think people are really thinking now is, what do we need now? What's relevant? You know, all that good stuff. So, you know, it's not strategic planning for managers. It's really those nuts and bolts things that we think counts right now.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. Right. So, Liesel, if folk want more information and stuff like that, do they pester Roy, or how would you like us?
Yeah, me or Roy. Everybody's got our details. We do also send an email out either this afternoon or tomorrow morning to just say thanks for attending. So then you've got all our details, and if you need any more information, pricing, costing, ideas, playing around with this, customizing it for your or a client organization, let us know.
Yeah, exactly. So from our side, we'll send the manager experience report to Roy. He'll distribute it, so it's a free piece of collateral in that. And also the invitation is, if anybody wants to speak to Margaret, myself in more detail around anything around teams and strengths and stuff like that, chat to Roy and Liesel, and they will connect us and all that good stuff. Please just go through Royal Liesel in the first instance, because obviously we'd like to just make sure that we're all on the same page and that we do give feedback around how people are experiencing our webinars and so forth. And I think Roy's given out his email. Myrna, you very much. Thanks, Kyle. All appreciated. We're down to 1 minute. My execution is feeling very comfortable right now that we've job done. But Liesel, I don't know if you...
Well.
Exactly. Spot on. Who knew?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, no, I think from my side, just thanks for attending. Those who were able to, thanks for staying. And we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you come back every Wednesday morning, 9 to 11, on the same Zoom link. With different and diverse topics. Next week, we are talking about leadership fallback, which is going to be also an interesting idea of people falling back into a lesser state of maturity because of the stress and the trauma that's happening at the moment.
Good. From Margaret and myself side, thank you very much for the opportunity to Worldview team. We'll continue to chat. For those that were on this, much appreciate your time. For those that were brave to ask questions, thank you very much. All good.
All good. Thanks, everyone.
Cheerio.
Thank you.